Homelessness. Emma Newman and Jessica Berryman. In this video, we will cover what is homelessness, homelessness in America, Seattle, Washington, our city of focus, causes, demographics, what keeps people in a homeless state, and a solution. What is homelessness? Homelessness can be defined many different ways. Homelessness is the circumstance when people are without a permanent dwelling, such as a house or apartment. Wikipedia. Adjective, of a person without a home and therefore typically living on the streets. Oxford Dictionary. Someone who is experiencing homelessness does not have a primary residence. He or she may be staying in a shelter, living on the streets, occupying a motel room, doubled up with friends or family, sleeping in a vehicle, or living in any other unstable or non-permanent situation. Homelessness connections. On a single night in 2016, 549,928 people were experiencing homelessness in the United States. Over one-fifth of people experiencing homelessness were children. 69% were over the age of 24, and 9% were between the ages of 18 and 24. A majority, 68%, was staying in emergency shelters, transitional housing programs, or safe havens, and 32% were in unsheltered locations. We chose to focus on Seattle, Washington.
Just 3 years ago, even with his limited income from gardening jobs, Jose Caro could afford a small house in a Seattle suburb for himself and his disabled partner. But then, the rent went up and up.
That's one of the reasons why we are where we are, because we started renting at $750 a little room. It was a little house, and then he raised it to $1,200, and he wanted to go to $1,500. There's no way.
Now, he lives in an RV near an airport. He's not alone. With growing frequency, people like Jose, who already lived on the margins, can no longer afford a home along the West Coast. Reporting by the Associated Press shows that the overall homeless population in California, Oregon, and Washington has jumped by 13% to 168,000 people over the last 2 years. In that same period, people living unsheltered climbed 18% to 105,000. The rise in homelessness comes when the West Coast economy is booming, pulling in more people. In Seattle, tech companies like Amazon have brought in thousands of people earning high salaries. Demand for homes has led to a leap in housing costs.
I got, economically zero unemployment in my city, and I got thousands of homeless people that actually are working and just can't afford housing.
People can move overnight. It's not very easy, but relatively easy to move more people into a city compared to how long it takes to build them housing.
Seattle leaders are now grappling over how and when to increase the supply of market rate and affordable housing.
So laundry, this is one of the sleeping rooms.
In West Coast cities, voters have approved more than $8 billion on affordable housing and other homelessness programs since 2015.
We transitioned thousands of people into permanent housing. The problem is, thousands more entered it. It's not like you solve the problem once and it's done.
One of Seattle's newest shelters, called a Navigation Center, accepts people who aren't sober, couples, and pets, and has storage for belongings. But while the shelter has taken dozens of people off the streets, it's had a hard time placing them in permanent housing.
We have like 8 units each month and maybe 1,600 people that would qualify for them. So that tells you a little bit about the need.
Those left on the streets often have to deal with the city sweeping up campsites, with no other place for them to go.
By moving people around and saying that they're not allowed to survive, to make do with what they've got and do the best that they can, you're making it harder for them to survive.
Back by the airport, Jose worries about the next time police tell him to move his RV. The motor doesn't work, and his truck is not strong enough.
It's not our choice, really. You're forced into some things in life where you have to do them and not make decisions, just do them.
And for now, he's forced to survive on the streets. Gillian Flackis, Associated Press, Seattle.
So leading into the demographics of the homelessness population in Seattle, there are 12,112 homeless people in Seattle as of January 2018. and there are 52% that are living unsheltered. And these individuals are living in vehicles, on the street, in abandoned buildings, and in other camps that are not recognized by the government. So these can be tent cities as well. And African Americans are disproportionately represented in the homelessness population. They consist of 6% of the overall population, yet they represent a whopping 27% of the homeless population. And among the 12,000 homeless individuals, 40% have at least one chronic illness, whether this is a cardiovascular disease, mental illness, or substance abuse. And so if you also look on the left at the graph, you can see that from 2014 to 2018, there's a significant increase in the amount of homeless individuals. And from 2017 to 2018, there was a 4% increase. So even amongst their efforts, it seems that the population is still increasing significantly. And also, if you look above on the faces of homelessness in 2018, you can see that there are roughly 78% of single individuals and then 21% of families with children. And I also thought it was interesting that 36% experienced domestic violence too. So it seems unfortunate that there are this many people in the state of Seattle that are experiencing homelessness. And it seems that there are a lot of causes to this case as well, which we'll get into next. So leading to the causes of homelessness in Seattle, the Seattle government website provided 4 main reasons why people are homeless in their state or in their city. And so the first one was lack of affordable housing. So according to All Home, its a lead agency in combating homelessness in Seattle, they conducted a survey on homeless individuals, and more than 70% expressed that they could afford $500 a month for rent. And unfortunately, that's virtually impossible in Seattle, where the average bedroom costs roughly $1,500 a month. And so, even with a booming economy in Seattle, this raises the cost of rent, which is good because then that means that people are getting into higher paying jobs and they're able to afford that rent. But then that leaves low income individuals being forced out of their apartments, out of their homes because of this competitive rate. And so then landlords are able to jack up the price and then kick these individuals out, leaving them on the streets. And with every 5% increase in rent, it results in 258 more homeless individuals in Seattle. So that clearly emphasizes the issue of rising costs of housing within Seattle. And housing providers can be very strict in their application process when homeless individuals try and apply for housing, where in a survey of 236 homeless individuals, 33 responded that they were denied housing because they simply missed an appointment or a phone call. And there are also racial disparities among this, where they found that American Indians and Native Americans waited a month longer on average than other racial groups when they did apply for housing. And so leading into the second factor, homelessness is also caused by lack of access to healthcare and behavioral health services, where individuals find themselves suffering from severe chronic illness or a crippling mental illness or a substance abuse disorder, and therefore they're unable to work and then they're unable to afford housing. And there was an interesting story given by Ethan Epstein in his article Homelessness in Seattle, and it provides a firsthand experience with Bibi. And Bibi worked as a bartender, a house cleaner, and in retail in the 1990s. There wasn't a job that she wouldn't take down. And in 2001, she was struck with a degenerative bone disease that stripped her ability to work. And so, with that unbearable pain, she found herself becoming addicted to opioids, and then led to an addiction to heroin. And so, her disability check was not enough to afford rent in Seattle. and then that accumulated into, being addicted to drugs, and then it kind of turned into a downward spiral into poverty, with many, finding themselves unable to work and then self-medicating with drugs or alcohol, making matters even worse. And so leading into the third factor, there are a lack of resources for children and young adults as they transition out of the child welfare system. So in a city of Seattle survey on homelessness, 40% of the respondents under the age of 25 had been in foster care, and 1 in 4 experienced homelessness within 4 years of leaving the system. And so these individuals find themselves unable to survive in a city that would require one to work 109 hours a week in a minimum wage job to afford their ridiculously expensive rent. And they're basically transferred from one welfare system to another, as there are not enough resources to provide them with enough financial leverage so that they can get out of that welfare system and into, competing in the economy of Seattle. And leading into the fourth factor is the criminalization of homelessness. And so there are two ways that criminalization can cause homelessness. The first is having a blemish on one's criminal record, and this leads to a significant discrimination when they apply for jobs, housing, welfare services, because they're basically bound by hypothetical chains that restrict them from access to these, because most places, most jobs, most housing, they require that you check off a box on any kind of application that says that you have been convicted of a felon, that you have a criminal record. And so they find themselves being discriminated against and declined from these resources due to their record. And then leading into the second factor of criminalization, homeless people are criminalized. And so the government will come into the tent camps, into those unrecognized areas where homeless people are living, and will actually arrest them or evict them of that place, and then they find themselves in jail, and then with a criminal record. What keeps people in this state of homelessness? Seattle has a good economy. While this seems like a good thing, it causes rent to go up in many places. The higher the rent prices, the more people get evicted and are without homes. A lot of people are homeless due to mental health conditions, and a lack of health care resources keeps them in this position. Fighting for homelessness is not very lucrative, and this causes a lack of political incentive. This is a chart showing the correlation between higher rent prices and higher number of homeless people in Seattle. Solution: if we had an abundance of resources to combat Seattle's homelessness, we would do the following. Focus on affordable housing. Build communities that have a price cap on housing prices. These communities would be available to individuals that make less than $400,000 a year. In summary, we covered what is homelessness, homelessness in America, Seattle, Washington, our city of focus, causes, demographics, what keeps people in a homeless state, and a solution.